Hello, it's a pleasure having you here, Councilmember Francisco Moya.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. We're here at John Jay College at our new Immigrant Student Success Center, and I'd like to ask you two questions.
Sure.
Okay, so the first is, what moment in your life inspired you to be a council member?
Um, I think where it all began was in terms of just being in public service was when I was real young. I actually saw my cousin get mugged right in front of her house when she was coming home from work. And that was something that just never happened in the neighborhood that we grew up in Corona, Queens. And it just sparked me to get active. And what I wound up doing was starting a Black association. Something as simple as that, where I was actually having conversations with neighbors and saying, we got to do something to protect our neighborhood. And I began organizing. And we would meet in the basement of my parents' home. And we started a block patrol. I was able to get some funding from then Councilwoman Helen Marshall, who gave us enough money for us to get walkie-talkies and whistles and jackets, and we would all sign up and do block patrol in that area. And it just led me to get very active in the community. There was an election happening at the same time for Congress, and there was about 7 candidates that were running. I sent out invitations to all 7 of them, and only one responded. And she was a up-and-coming Puerto Rican individual that was working extremely hard to really start talking about the issues that were affecting the Latino community. And when she came, she talked to the entire group, and it was my brother, my cousins, and some of my neighbors. She said, "You guys should get involved. Why don't you come and volunteer on my campaign?" We went out to Bushwick, Brooklyn, which is not the Bushwick, Brooklyn that you all know now. We cut our teeth in learning how to really do the legwork in politics, and she wound up winning. And her name is Congresswoman Nydia Velazquez, the first Puerto Rican female to be elected to Congress. And that's what really led me to start getting more involved politically. I think that one of the greatest things that that offered me was things that you just can't learn in the books, right? It's the actual life lessons that you get when you're actually out there in the community organizing, which really made a big difference for me. And I wound up interning for her throughout my years in college, and I was not a political science major or a government and politics major. I was an Asian studies major. I was going to go teach English in Japan, and while I was interning for the Congresswoman, I tell this story all the time, I'll never forget this. I think it was like the last week, I took my last final, and I got a call from her, and she said, "Do you want a job?" And I was like, "Hell yeah." She said, "Okay, but here's the thing. You have to be here on Monday. Take it or leave it." I was like, "I'll be there." And I left everything. Family, friends, girlfriend, everything to go and pursue this dream that I had of really learning how government works. And I knew that that was the only way to do it. And I tell this story to a lot of young college kids as well, that I didn't even own a suit. I borrowed my dad's blazer. I had like 2 pairs of khakis, and he got me a one-way ticket on a Greyhound bus. I didn't know anybody down there. Wound up having to sleep in her office for a few days because there was the only place that had a bathroom and a shower. And my cousin came down to work there as well, and we wound up getting a studio basement apartment in probably one of the shadiest areas in Washington, D.C. And we lived off of free receptions that had food and drinks for us there. And I spent some time working for her and for another member of Congress from California. And it just led me to get a real great appreciation for how government works. And that's what led me to come back home and do a lot of the things that I was able to do.
Thank you for sharing that. I appreciate it. My second question is that ICE has increased its presence, especially in Queens. I live in Elmhurst. What legislation are you proposing to stop this?
So we have to deal with it in multiple levels, right? When it comes to dealing with ICE, that's at the federal level. But a lot of the things that we have to do is force the federal government to recognize the policies that they're enacting is just un-American. For 8 years, I served in the New York State Assembly, and I carried some of the most significant pieces of legislation that dealt with immigrant rights and protection for immigrants in the state of New York, even before this was the rallying cry that we have now. I'm the lead sponsor and the author for the New York State DREAM Act. I've introduced the legislation to make New York State a sanctuary state by introducing the Liberty Act a few years ago, and driver's licenses for all. These are the way that states can really come together to protect our immigrant communities. You know, the fact that this country and the city that we live in is founded by immigrants, we can't forget what makes this country so great. And that is the struggle, the hustle, and the sheer determination of some of the most successful people that we have seen in this country, whether you are a CEO, a business owner, or a doctor or a lawyer. They have all come from an immigrant experience. I've never had to look very far when it comes to the struggles of the immigrant communities. My father immigrated to this country when he was 19 years old from Ecuador. He didn't know anybody. My father had this desire to become an architect, and he knew that he couldn't do it back home. He was not going to be able to get that type of education in Ecuador, and so he came here. He barely had $100 in his pocket, as he always likes to tell me, and he didn't know anybody. He had to try to figure things out. He spent a year here trying to struggle to find what he can do. He wound up getting drafted and sent to Vietnam. My father scored 173 on his IQ test, which is borderline genius, by the way. I like to say my older brother got my dad's brains and I got my mom's good looks. But they still sent him to the front lines. And, he went to fight for a country that he knew was the only place that he could achieve success in life. That was the American dream that he was pursuing, and he was willing to sacrifice it all just to get there. And I think that that's some of the courage that you find in a lot of the immigrants that come to this country, who will sacrifice everything to have that opportunity to achieve that American dream. When he came back, there was the World's Fair that was happening in Flushing Meadows, Corona Park, and he was walking along the Great Lawn, and he likes to tell the story. He was wearing his nice military uniform, and he saw this beautiful woman that came across him, and he recognized her from back home. He wound up having a conversation with her, and it led to a beautiful marriage, and they were able to settle down in Corona, Queens, and buy a home, raise 2 kids. My father worked 2 jobs. He started off as a clerk at a bank on Wall Street that was called Bankers Trust. And then he sold shoes at night at a department store that you won't remember. It was called Alexander's over in Main Street, Flushing. and then he, through the GI Bill, he was able to go to the City University of New York, another CUNY graduate in the family. He didn't get the degree that he wanted, but he graduated with honors. He had a family to raise, and he went on to be very successful in what he did. He retired. He worked for multiple financial institutions after that. But when he retired in 2009, he retired as the first vice president of Merrill Lynch. He could have gone back to Ecuador, traveled the world with my mother. Instead, what he did was he went back to school to go get the degree that he always wanted. And it just showed the sheer dedication of what he wanted to accomplish. And the day that it was his opportunity to bask in his glory of an achievement of a 19-year-old who came to this country seeking that one degree, he wasn't able to walk to get his diploma, because instead he stood on the corner of 103rd Street and Roosevelt Avenue at 6 o'clock in the morning handing out palm cards because it was his youngest son's election. And I tell that story because that was the day that I became the first Ecuadorian-American to ever be elected to public office, not just in the state of New York, but in the entire country. And it's through the sacrifices of our parents and those that came before us that have opened the doors for us to have the opportunity to achieve that American dream. And so when we talk about protecting immigrants in this country and what we are doing to help as legislators, it's very personal to me. So this is why I fight to get the DREAM Act passed, why we should have a sanctuary state, why we need to be talking and demonstrating to the world that we are a country of immigrants. When you see the instances of some cases that have been very public, right? Edison Barrios, another Ecuadorian whose family came to my office to seek help. We prevented the Homeland Security from deporting Mr. Barrios. And now he's back here able to work on his case. We also have Pablo, who was the pizza delivery man, also an Ecuadorian, who has now finally had the opportunity to see justice prevail and be able to now stay here in this country with his family. It is the responsibility of every elected official, whether you are an immigrant or not, to stand up for what is right and demonstrate to the world that we are not going to just fold and allow the rhetoric that is coming from Washington to be able to win at the end of the day. And so to me, it's just not the introduction of these significant pieces of legislation, but it's how we organize and how we go out there and show the world and show all these other elected leaders that think that the root of the problems in America are immigrants. We know that the reason why we have such success today is because of the impact that the immigrant community has made. It makes our country the greatest country in the world, and I'm just very proud to be able to be an elected official in this time to stand up for a lot of people who don't have a voice right now.
Well, thank you so much for that.
Thank you.
I appreciate you taking the time here today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. It was a pleasure. I look forward to seeing what you do in the future.
Great. And as a constituent, please feel free to come and visit me in the office.
Of course, of course.